Hello, this is Meet the Writers. I'm Georgina Godwin. Now, there was a lovely event this week to award the 2024 International Booker Prize. It's given annually for the finest single work of fiction from around the world, which has been translated into English and published in the UK or Ireland. The prize celebrates the vital work of translators, with the £50,000 prize money divided equally between the author and the translator. Well, this year it was won by Kairos, written by Jenny Erpenbeck and translated by Michael Hoffman. Fiammetta Rocco is the administrator of the prize, and she joins me now to tell us about the process of choosing the winners. Fiammetta, how do you get to that point?
Well, it's a very, very long road. We start in August, having already chosen a panel of 5 judges. Publishers send in their submissions. There are no quotas. There's no limit to what can be sent in. You know, when we started, there was so little new translated fiction that we've just had to let it build up, and build up it really has. This year we had 149 books, biggest submission list ever. So the judges read, they read in parallel, the books come in, they're numbered, the judges read them all the time. And the reason that they do it in that way is because, unlike other prizes where the books are sometimes divided up between the judges, there's a sort of triage process. With the Booker, the judges consider every book. Every judge reads every book.
That's huge.
So for about 6 months, they will be discussing 25 or 30 books a month.
So that's a process of regular meetings, and I'm supposing that you're in all of those meetings. Tell us the sort of dynamics then of that panel and how those went this year.
It was a very interesting panel. You know, you choose panels for all sorts of reasons. There's one particular rule that we have, is that because the prize money is divided equally between the author and the translator, there is always a professional translator on the panel. Other than that, they have to be super readers. They have to be able to express themselves quite clearly about why books move them. But I think more important than anything, they have to be prepared to listen to each other, sometimes to have their minds changed, you know. Not every book is perfect for every reader, but every book deserves to find its ideal reader. And sometimes an ideal reader will change another reader's mind.
You have been in charge of this prize for a long time, and I wonder if you see any particular strong traits coming out of particular countries.
I wouldn't say particularly strong traits that are linked nationally, if you want. These are translations that are published in Britain. They're not every translation into English all over the world. And what we see about what's published in Britain really has changed. And I think that reflects change of taste. Your average buyer of a novel written in English is a 64-year-old woman in Britain. For translated fiction, it's completely different. Half the translated fiction in this country is bought by people under 35. And half of that, which amounts to about 500,000 copies, is bought by people between 17 and 24. Their favourite languages are Japanese and Korean.
That's astonishing. And I suppose that younger demographic is also reflected by your choice of one of your sponsors, which is Maison Valentino. Tell me about that partnership.
It's a very interesting partnership. A long-standing, wonderful luxury Italian fashion house. They've long worked with writers, and in fact, we've admired their work for a long time that they've done with Booker Prize authors. They've worked with Bernardine Evaristo. They've worked with Hanya Yanagihara, obviously shortlisted and winners of the English Language Prize. But this was the first time that the International Prize came together with Maison Valentino. And we're really delighted to be the beneficiaries of their support for the literary world in general. And what they did this year was that they sponsored the winning dinner on Tuesday at Tate Modern, which was lovely. But their contribution has also enabled us to donate 500 sets of the shortlisted books to libraries across the UK via the Reading Agency. The Reading Agency, a 25-year-old British charity that supports reading, particularly through libraries and in prisons.
And you also have a partnership with English Pen.
We do. So this year, books were submitted by 131 translators, and they are working from 39 languages. Those sort of numbers make you feel that perhaps it's an easy thing to do, but it's really hard to become a literary translator. And for many, the hardest part is getting a toe on the ladder, that very, very, very first step. So later this year, the Booker Prize Foundation will be partnering with English Pen to support, in particular, emerging translators from the global majority. They are the ones who are most chronically underrepresented in international publishing.
Many thanks to Fiammetta Rocco. Well, now let's turn to Sigrid Rausing of Granta, which published the winning book. Sigrid, what is the story of Kairos?
So Kairos takes place in the early 1980s, or through the 1980s, and it covers the love story between Katarina, a young woman, a young aspiring cultural worker, and a much older writer, Hans. And they meet quite by chance, getting off a bus. And it's a story of them coming together, having a love affair. He's married. She's very young. He's an established writer and has a lot of cultural capital. And it's a story of a darkening love affair which descends into an S&M story of love, passion, sexuality. It's a very sensuous book. And it spans the 80s. It essentially begins and ends with the end of East Germany. But beyond the love story, it's a fascinating portrait of what it is to be relatively privileged in East Germany, to be able to travel to Moscow. It's a portrait of Moscow from an East German point of view, very different from our view of Moscow at the time. And it's also a story of West Berlin and the West through very subtle observations from the point of view of the East.
And how did the book come to Granta?
Oh, we've published Jenny for a long time, 20 years probably.
And I wonder, as a publisher, is it more difficult to sell books in translation?
In our experience, really not, but it depends a lot on, what happens with the book. And a prize like the International Booker does so much to lift the book into public recognition, and not just for the author, but also for the translator. And the way that the International Booker has always put the translator and the author in a kind of relationship, that the prize is split between them. And I think that's a very good thing. And I think, some of our best-selling books overall are in translation. So if you think of Han Kang's The Vegetarian, The Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata is probably our best-selling book one of our best-selling books of all time. So our experience is that as long as there's recognition, as long as the readership establishes a kind of sense of who these writers are, then it's not harder.
Sigrid, thank you very much indeed. That was Sigrid Rausing of Granta. And it's time now to meet our winners, Jenny Erpenbeck and Michael Hoffman. I'm really keen to find out how a magnificent book like this begins, and not just the work itself, but where the creative process begins within the writers. So Jenny, let's start with you, because I know that you were born in Berlin back in 1967. You were an opera director. What led you to that point? Tell us about growing up and the creative processes that drove you to that point.
Actually, I became an opera director in order to find my own way in a family of writers. So my grandparents were writers. My father also wrote fiction and poetry. My mom was a translator. So I tried my best to do something else. This was the opera directing, to make my own way. And somehow the writing was waiting in the background.
Yeah, there was just no way you could escape it, given your history, your genes.
And I understood that if you write a book, this is individual enough. It will be different from your ancestors' books, It's not like everybody's writing. Everybody is writing his or her own book. So you will always have the freedom for your own writing.
But the point about your work is that every one of your books has been different. I mean, you've written on economy, archaeology, architecture, political history, musicology. I mean, there's so many different tangents that you've gone off in your various works.
You try your best to make something out of your life experience.
I'm very interested to know about that life experience, because it seems to encompass so much.
Yeah, I never knew that I would be one day so interested in history as I am now. happened while writing books that I would look at biographies with this, like paying attention also to the historic circumstances and to understand better how people's lives are made by historic changes, by upheavals, by changes of law, of systems. So it always interested me how people deal with losses of their place or of someone, and you, in a way, I couldn't, I would always end up with getting involved in the history.
Mm-hmm. So this book, Kairos, you're talking about history. It's set at a particularly important part of history. Tell us about that.
I think I became a writer with the fall of the wall because I got a feeling of how quickly a whole system can disappear, how quickly things that you consider being like eternal could be gone. And it was not so much about judging if the system was rather bad or rather good, but it was just the fact that everything changed. That made me think about the fragility of all those daily routines, the products that you could buy in the supermarket, but also all the culture that we had in East Germany. Everything was replaced by something else after the fall of the wall. So we had to deal with a lot of change. And the good thing, if you are a writer, is that you are put into a distance by experiencing such a thing.
So how does history play out in this book?
Yeah, I started the story as a private story. So you will have the love story in the beginning, and there's a normal life. The male main character and the female one, they are falling in love. They are going to cinema, they are reading books, they are interested in art and culture, and they are having good talks and so on and so on. And then slowly you get the feeling that the politics that in the beginning are in the background, they are moving into the foreground slowly. And then you can see that the problem of the communication between the old generation and the new generation, which is also in the relationship because the male character is much older than the girl or the young woman. The failing communication is also to be found in the political system. So the language that lost its truth in a way and lost its function to express a meaning, but is only serving as some kind of surface, is also to be found in the language of the newspapers, the official language. And what interested me was that something that was started as some experiment in terms of anti-fascism, socialism, and started as something new, became something very old and wrong and couldn't work anymore. And of course also the question of waiting for something new is in the book. So many people of my generation thought there would be a change of their own system in 1989, 1990. Very soon it became clear that we would just become a part of the Federal Republic. So the revolution only lasted for 8 weeks. And then it was clear that we wouldn't be able to have a change of our own system and found our own new structure, but we would just become part of a structure that was already given in the Federal Republic. And this interested me too, to understand how quickly this was. Normally the stories being told about the fall of the wall end with the fall of the wall. And what interested me was to speak about the years before it and after it. So to take inside longer term, to understand what led to the fall of the wall and what came after it. So the ending wasn't just a happy ending.
In this book, and indeed across most of your work, it does seem that infidelity, or at least betrayal, is a key part of the work. I wonder what drives that for you.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most interesting things to have a look how something that seems right in the beginning becomes something wrong. And if you are dealing with language as a writer, it's very interesting to see that language can be a surface as well as something that is made to hide things, or language is also containing silence.
Yeah.
So language is not only the spoken word, but also the unspoken word.
So how on earth then do you, because that's a very complex use of language, how then, Michael, do you translate that, this very kind of nuanced way of using words, into a different language?
All the things that Jenny is describing are things that in her book, and that she's either directly captured or that she's hinted at, at least in writing and between, either in individual sections of the book or in between sections sometimes. Everything is very securely there, and I don't, as the translator, I don't have to. There is no added difficulty. These are just the qualities of the blueprint that Jenny has presented, and the attributes of the book, and I think they come across willy-nilly. If she'd written a different book, it would, a different book would come out. There is no, for the translator, there is no added difficulty.
No, absolutely. You're not just a translator, you're a reviewer, but you're also a poet. How important is that poetic sensibility when it comes to translating?
I think it's really important, just because translation is a matter of detail. There's nothing I'm going to be able to do to the architecture of Jenny's books or anyone's books. They are as they are, and they continue to be as they are, and that's one's undertaking, as one's pledge as a translator. So everything is a matter of tiny detail, really vanishingly small details. And in that, I feel I have a kind of dual obligation. I have an obligation to the original text and author, and I have an obligation to English, which, in my own exercise of it over 40-something years, I see as something that is both a very economical, often rather oblique language, and also a language with a huge and increasingly neglected vocabulary.
So you have a German background.
I am German. I came to England when I was 4. We spoke German at home. This doesn't make me naturally cut out to be a translator. I think the natural translators are the ones who perhaps don't have the other language very well, but are driven, lay themselves across the gulf between languages. Whereas I'm quite happy to be on either side. I'm happy to be in English, I'm happy to be in German. And as I wrote once in a bilingual kid, translation is not a naturally occurring activity. But once I sort of made myself a translator, that then is what I did. And German was what I mined, and I would sort of dig things out of German and put them in sort of tidy heaps in English. I am a language person, as a poet or sometime poet and writer about books, and I want to sort of display English, to use its strengths, to be playful, to be oblique, to use the Latin words that are in English that increasingly are fallen into disuse and acquire also, it seems to me, increasingly negative meanings. That's my, in German you'd say instrumentarium, and that's what I work with.
We're talking about German and English and also Latin, but of course, Jenny, the title is actually in Greek.
Yeah, I love the Latin language and ancient Greek language, and I learned it at school. And
me too.
I would always very, very much enjoy studying it, and it was just too short, but it was at least enough to basically understand how rich this culture is. So my first translation at school was of Ovid Metamorphosis, and I really loved to translate a part of it, a small part of it.
What does the title mean?
Kairos means something like the lucky moment. So there's also a god named Kairos, and he is said to have some hair on his forehead where you can grab him when he's coming. But if he goes away, he has no hair on the back of his head, so that you cannot get hold of him anymore. So you have to grab him. In 1990, one of the first things I would do with the newly won freedom was that I entered the Free University in West Berlin, and I enrolled in a seminar about Pindar, the ancient Greek poet, and Kairos was a very central word that we spoke about in this seminar. And the professor wrote a whole book about Pindar later. The interesting thing of Kairos is that it's an encounter of the God's word and the human word. So the gods would open an opportunity and the humans have to catch it, to take it. It's also about the lucky moment as the best moment that cannot be reached anymore, neither before or after. So it's also something that everything will be measured with or at. What I thought is that, once it is over, you will look back all the time. It's also about time. It's just a window in time, and it lets you look through the layers of time into the depth of history too.
In the book, the two protagonists, Catherine and Hans, looking through it, my opinion of him was that he was an utter shit, as we would say. And I just wonder, and I'd be interested in your opinion on this, Michael, but I just wonder if the reaction has been different from men and women to how Hans behaves.
Yeah, the interesting thing was that men reacted even stronger to this male character. So my male readers would be very angry about him. So as if they had never known that men could behave like this to a woman. I think the women were not so surprised because I met many and I have many friends, and of course also readers would write me letters and saying, or after readings come in the signing queue and would tell me that they have experienced the very same.
Yeah. Michael, what's your opinion?
I must say it was tempting to take him down a little bit, and I possibly gave in to that. Everything is sort of tiny, but I talk about his little quiff of hair. That's a quote. There's something sort of slightly mocking, slightly debunking about him.
As a man, did you find him awkward to read?
I was. The German word is betroffen. I was consternated. I was dismayed. It's yes, but one hears it is said, and I believe it. Most relationships are ended or appear to have been ended by women. In a way, it's a form of greed, but it's also a form of stoicism that men are able to persist in dreadful circumstances for longer.
Let's talk about a relationship of a different kind, and that's between the two of you, not necessarily as individuals, but as writer and translator. And I wonder how that works. What's the process?
Yeah, we have been working together for the first time. So, of course, it was also about getting to know each other. I would explain here and there the technique that I use. So I also spoke about the repetitions that I like to make. Because I think if there's a story happening in between the repetition will be seen anew the second time or the third time. So it will never ever be a repetition, even if the words are the same. So we spoke about that. And we would just have a look at the text and the questions involved and that was it.
How much bounce back is there between the two of you during the process?
Jenny sent me the pre-publication. I did the thing by myself on my own and sent it to her when I was done with it, and then she went over it, and then I went over it again, kind of many more times, as I said I like to do. I think the repetition took a little. I myself. I had a slight horror of repetition. I dislike repeating myself, I think I had to be brought to the understanding that these things are important and do work, which I did. It's sort of to do with my philosophy for English, which is that it's English is always varying, or comes out always different.
German too, I would say. German too.
I've spoken to many writers who for instance, have absolutely no relationship with their Japanese translator or their Chinese translator or whatever. And I wonder if you can work like that. And also, of course, you translate books by people who are long dead. I mean, that you can't have a conversation with Kafka about what he really meant. How does that work?
I mean, I think by my practice, I'd kind of got used to sort of consulting myself, and there not being anyone else to consult. And in a sense, the English translation is always going to be the sort of the paradigmatic one, or the as it were, the kind of gateway translation. And I mean, I've been told that translators in other languages will also sort of look at an English translation of a book alongside whatever other language. I mean, English is, I would say, alas, terribly important. I mean, I would say I believe in kind of equal rights for all languages or other languages, but English is rather sort of, English is a bully.
Finally, Jenny, I mean, obviously this book has been a huge success in Germany. It's now been brought to the rest of the world, or to the rest of the English-speaking world. Do you think this is going to have an impact on German literature? Do you think people will start reading more German books in translation?
I hope people here will start reading German books and trust German books a bit more. In Germany, I think the prize has an impact on like how they perhaps will look at my books in Germany as well. You know, that it's the German press was kind of surprised that I won this prestigious prize here, and yeah, so I think it will have an impact on both sides. And I hope also the other German writers will be translated a bit more. I don't know how the percentage is here in Great Britain, but in America it's like 2 or 3% translated literature, like considering the whole market. So, and this is, I would say, this is too little and could be changed. Should be changed.
That's partly what I mean by English being a bully. I mean, it's prepotent. I think there's something sort of slightly immature about Germany. I think they don't know what they have, and they often wait to see it reflected from abroad before they understand what they have. I think there have been instances of that in the past, and I think it will do Germany good to see what they have in Jenny Erpenbeck.
Well, we're very, very pleased to have you both here and to be able to read this delightful book, Kairos. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Kairos by Jenny Erpenbeck, translated by Michael Hoffman, is published by Granta, and it's out now. You've been listening to Meet the Writers, thanks to the production team of Tamsin Howard and Steph Chungu. You can download this show and previous episodes from our website or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.